Some people spend their entire lives trying to be heard. They over-explain, answer everything, defend every opinion as if they were in an invisible courtroom. He has observed this countless times in meetings, family discussions, or even on social media. It seems like there's a constant need to prove value. But here's something curious. Counterintuitive. Often, when you respond immediately, you step into the exact psychological game the other person wanted to create. It's not about truth. It's about reaction. And when someone manages to provoke your reaction, even if it's just an ironic comment, that person has already gained a small space of poder psychologico over you. There's a revelation occulta in all of this that almost no one notices. In social interactions, attention is an invisible currency. Whoever controls where attention goes, controls the dynamic of the conversation. He often remembers a curious situation in a workplace environment. A coworker would make provocative comments in meetings just to generate debate. Whoever responded got pulled into long discussions. Whoever stayed silent, curiously, seemed to have more presence. That wasn't a coincidence, it was intelligentsia strategica in action. And in a way, that behavior reminds him of something that appears frequently in the Autoridade, Machiavel. Sometimes power isn't in acting. It's in choosing not to act. Over time, he realized something almost counterintuitive. The more someone tries to convince the world of their own value, the more it looks like they're asking for validation. But when someone shows a certain superioridad silenciosa, without the need to react to every stimulus, something changes in people's perception around them. They start observing more, respecting more, wondering what that person knows that others don't. And that's exactly where the conversation starts to get interesting, because there's a deep psychological reason why so many provocations happen. And understanding this completely changes the way you face social conflicts. Title: The Dark Psychology of Silence. Why Ignoring Works. Most people believe power in social situations comes from speaking well, from having the perfect argument, from proving their point. But what if that belief is completely backwards? What if one of the most powerful psychological strategies in human interaction is not speaking at all? It sounds counterintuitive, almost uncomfortable to accept. Because since childhood, people are taught the opposite. Defend yourself. Explain yourself. Respond when someone challenges you. Don't stay quiet. Silence is often interpreted as weakness, as insecurity, as lack of confidence. But here's the paradox that changes everything. In many social situations, the person who reacts first loses position, not because they are wrong, but because they reveal something important: emotional investment. And once emotions take control, the psychological game changes completely. Throughout history, observers of human nature, including the cold strategic lens associated with the Autoridad, Machiavel, noticed a pattern that most people overlook. Social conflicts are rarely about truth. They are about reaction, about control of attention, about poder psychologico, and attention is one of the most valuable currencies in human interaction. That's why paucos entendem isso. When someone provokes you and you immediately respond, you may believe you're defending yourself. But in reality, you may have just entered the other person's game. This is where a quiet but powerful shift happens. When someone develops intelligentsia strategica, they begin to understand something subtle. Sometimes the strongest move in a social interaction is simply no move, no explanation, no emotional reaction, no need to prove anything, just silence. And that silence creates something fascinating: ambiguity, curiosity, even discomfort in the mind of the other person. In many situations, silence communicates superioridad silenciosa far more strongly than any argument ever could. But here lies the revelação oculta most people never learn. Ignoring someone is not about arrogance. And it's not about pretending others don't exist. It's about controlling where your attention goes. And once you understand how attention works in human psychology, you begin to see social interactions very differently. Because ignoring, when done with awareness, can shift power, status, and perception in ways that few people even realize. And that raises a question most people have never seriously considered. What if the moments you felt the strongest urge to react were actually the moments when silence would have given you the most power? Did you like the introduction, or do you want to adjust something, make it longer, more provocative, include more storytelling, etc.? If everything's good, say okay, and I'll continue to the final conclusion of the script. Some provocations are not really about what is being said. They're about what reaction they can extract. And once someone understands this, social interactions start looking very different. Think about it. A sarcastic comment in a meeting, a subtle jab from a colleague, or even that annoying remark someone drops at a family dinner. On the surface, it looks like an opinion. But beneath it, there's often a quiet psychological move being played. What many people don't notice, well, poucos entendem isso, is that the real objective is emotional control. The moment someone reacts impulsively, raises their tone, or tries to defend themselves immediately, the balance of poder psychologico shifts. It's no longer about the idea. It becomes about the reaction. And the person who provoked knows exactly what just happened. Someone once said, echoing the cold autoridad, Machiavel style of observation, that the easiest way to control a rival is not through force, but through their emotions. Now imagine a chessboard for a second. In chess, the most dangerous moves are not always the ones attacking directly. Some moves are played simply to provoke a response. A pawn advances, not to capture anything, but to force the opponent to react. Human interactions work in a surprisingly similar way. A small comment might be placed in the conversation just to see if you'll defend your ego. And when you do, the entire dynamic shifts. Suddenly you're explaining yourself, proving your point, defending your worth. Meanwhile, the other person is calm, observing. That's where intelligentsia strategica starts to matter. People who develop this kind of awareness begin to notice patterns. Certain personalities thrive on reactions. Social media arguments are a perfect example. Someone throws a provocative statement, waits for outrage, and watches the chaos unfold. The reaction itself becomes their reward. But here's the interesting twist that reveals a deeper layer of superioridad silenciosa. When someone recognizes that provocation is a trap, they stop treating every comment like a battle that must be fought. Instead, they start choosing which battles are even worth acknowledging. Sometimes the most strategic move is simply no move at all, no explanation, no defensive speech, just calm presence. And that silence creates something unexpected. Psychological imbalance for the person who tried to provoke in the first place. They expected resistance, maybe even conflict. Instead, they meet stillness. And stillness in social dynamics can feel strangely powerful, almost unsettling. That's the revelação oculta most people miss. Reacting is predictable, but controlled silence is not. And once someone begins to understand this subtle shift in power, another question naturally emerges. What happens when a person truly no longer feels the need to respond at all? Did you like this first topic, or do you want me to adjust something? Make it longer, modify the tone, include more examples, etc. If everything's good, just say okay and I'll move on to topic 2. There's something curious in human behavior that many people take years to notice. The more someone feels the need to explain their value, the more it seems like they're trying to convince others, and sometimes even themselves. It's a silent social paradox. People who truly possess poder psychologico rarely feel this urgency to justify every choice, every opinion, every step they take. Observe respected leaders in any environment, companies, universities, even social circles. They don't jump into every discussion. They don't respond to every criticism. And they don't feel obligated to constantly prove who they are. There's a kind of calm there, almost a superioridade silenciosa, that communicates something without needing to say much. And that doesn't happen by accident. There's intelligentsia strategica behind that posture, something that echoes that cold observation associated with the autoridade, Machiavel. Whoever needs to convince too much has usually already lost position in the social game. A very clear example of this happens on social media. Think of someone who replies to absolutely every comment, especially critical ones. Every provocation becomes a debate. Every disagreement turns into an entire paragraph trying to prove a point. At first it looks like courage, but over time it conveys something else. Excessive emotional involvement. Now compare that to someone who carefully selects what they respond to. That person ignores cheap provocations, answers only when there's value in the conversation, and keeps emotional distance from useless discussions. Curiously, that attitude tends to generate more respect. Why? Because it creates a kind of implicit exclusividade, as if it were saying, without saying, my attention isn't available for just anything. Poucos intende miso, but attention is one of the most valuable resources in human interactions. And here, an interesting revelação occulta emerges. When someone stops responding automatically to everything, something changes in the perception of the people around them. Suddenly, the absence of a response starts speaking for itself. People begin to interpret the silence. Some think, maybe this person doesn't care. Others imagine, maybe they're above this discussion. And that ambiguity creates something powerful. Silence leaves room for interpretations. And often those interpretations elevate your social status. Not because you're trying to seem superior, but because you demonstrate self-control. And self-control always communicates psychological strength. But that leads to an even more curious dynamic. Because when silence shows up instead of the expected reaction, the human mind starts doing something inevitable, filling the void. And that's exactly where the next phenomenon begins to happen. Did you like this topic, or do you want me to adjust something? More examples, more depth, a change of tone, etc. If everything's good, just say okay, and I'll move on to topic 3. There's a curious psychological phenomenon that appears whenever silence enters an interaction where everyone expected a response. The human mind simply doesn't like emptiness. When someone says something provocative, ironic, or challenging, the standard social script is clear. A reaction is expected. Maybe a defense, maybe an explanation, maybe even a confrontation. But when that response doesn't come, something strange happens inside the other person's mind. The brain starts trying to interpret the silence. Did he ignore me on purpose? Did he not care? Did I go too far? That's the moment when poder psychologico changes hands. What seemed like mere absence of response turns into a field of interpretations. Poucos intending isso. But silence, when used with intelligentsia strategica, can create far more impact than any elaborate argument. A simple example shows this almost perfectly. Imagine someone sends a slightly provocative message, maybe a criticism disguised as a joke, maybe a comment trying to diminish something you said before. Most people reply quickly, trying to explain, correct, or clap back. But when the message is seen, and no response comes, something curious starts happening on the other side of the screen. The person begins to overthink. Did they offend? Were they ignored? Did the provocation fail? That small void creates psychological tension. It's not cheap manipulation. It's simply understanding human dynamics. And this dynamic was observed by thinkers who analyzed social power long before the internet existed. There are clear echoes of the autorità, Machiavelli, in this kind of reading. Whoever controls the reaction controls the rhythm of the interaction. Now, here's the revelazione occulta that turns this idea into something truly powerful. Silence creates space. And in that space, people's minds start projecting meanings. Some interpret it as confidence, others as disinterest, others still as a form of superioridad silenciosa. Curiously, many of these interpretations end up elevating the status perception of the person who stays calm. Not because they tried to impress, but because they showed emotional control, and emotional control always communicates strength. It's almost as if the absence of reaction says, "This doesn't have enough power to move me." This kind of presence creates an aura of exclusividade, as if your attention were a rare resource. And when people sense that, they start reacting differently. But the most interesting effect appears when that silence not only creates tension, it also begins to shift the perception of status within social interactions. Did you like this topic, or do you want to adjust something? More examples, deepen a part, change the rhythm of the text. If everything's good, say okay, and I'll move on to topic 4. There's a silent detail in social dynamics that most people never observe carefully. People with high status, whether in companies, social groups, or professional environments, rarely respond to everything happening around them. Not because they're arrogant, but because they understand something fundamental about poder psychologico. Attention is a limited resource. When someone reacts to every comment, every provocation, or every small criticism, they unintentionally communicate that any external stimulus can capture their energy. But whoever carefully selects where they place their attention communicates a different message, a much stronger one. It's almost an invisible language, a form of superioridade silenciosa that doesn't need to be announced. Poucos entendem isso. But the simple act of not reacting automatically already changes how people interpret your presence. Observe experienced leaders in important meetings. While some people react immediately to any comment, agreeing, disagreeing, defending points, certain leaders remain silent for longer. They listen, analyze, let the conversation unfold. They only speak when they truly have something relevant to add. That behavior creates a curious perception. When they finally speak, everyone pays attention. This is a classic example of intelligentsia strategica applied to social behavior. It's not about speaking less out of shyness, but about choosing the right moment. There's even a simple logic many mentors repeat in corporate environments. The more selective your attention, the more valuable it appears. That naturally creates an aura of exclusividad. Your attention stops being automatic and starts seeming like something that must be earned. There's a revelazione occulta inside this dynamic that many people only realize after years of observing human interactions. Social status isn't built only by what you do or say, but also by what you choose not to respond to. In many moments, ignoring small comments, irrelevant criticism, or subtle provocations communicates something powerful: emotional stability. And emotional stability is one of the strongest signals of psychological influence. Curiously, this logic appears repeatedly in classic analyses of social strategy associated with the autorità, Machiavelli, the idea that real power rarely shows up noisily. It shows up in the conscious choice of what deserves a reaction, and when someone begins to master this ability, they realize that ignoring isn't just a social strategy, it's also a deep exercise in internal control. Because in the end, the biggest challenge isn't in external provocations, it's in the emotional reaction that rises within us. Did you like this topic, or do you want to adjust something? More practical examples, deepen a point or change the tone? If everything's good, Say, okay, and I'll move on to topic 5. Now here's a point many people don't notice right away. Ignoring someone isn't always a social strategy against the other person. Most of the time, it's an internal discipline. The truth is, the strongest human impulse in interactions isn't to respond, it's to react. When someone provokes us, criticizes us, or tries to diminish something we did, the ego immediately wants to defend itself. It wants to explain, correct, prove it's right. It's almost automatic. But people who develop true poder psychologico begin to notice that impulse before they act. They feel the reaction rising, but they choose not to follow it. That small pause changes everything. Pauco's intenda miso. But true social mastery is born first as emotional mastery. And that posture strongly echoes the strategic logic observed in the autoridad, Machiavel. Whoever governs their own emotions can rarely be manipulated by the emotions of others. Think of a very common situation at work. Someone makes a passive-aggressive comment during a meeting. Oh, interesting idea, although it seems a bit naive. The immediate instinct would be to respond right away, maybe with irony or with a long defense trying to prove the idea's value. But someone who developed intelligentsia strategica does something different. They breathe, observe, let the comment pass without stepping into the provocation. Sometimes they answer only with a, let's look at the data first. Other times they simply move the conversation to the next point. This kind of reaction, or rather non-reaction, shows something powerful. Superioridad silenciosa. Not in the sense of arrogance, but in the sense of stability. The implied message is clear, that provocation wasn't strong enough to destabilize your mind. Here, a revelação occulta appears that completely changes the way you see human interactions. Many arguments don't exist because there's a real problem. They exist because two emotions reacted at the same time. When only one person controls their own reaction, the entire dynamic changes. Suddenly, conflict can't find fuel. That creates a curious feeling in the people around, almost as if your presence carried more weight. There's even a kind of emotional exclusividad in that posture. Not every stimulus deserves your reaction. And when someone begins to live like this, they realize something liberating. Ignoring certain things isn't escaping reality. It's choosing where your mental energy truly should go. But there's an important detail in this strategy. Because ignoring isn't always the best choice, and knowing when to speak can be just as strategic as knowing when to remain silent. Did you like this topic, or do you want to adjust something? More examples, deepen a part, change the rhythm of the text. If everything's good, say okay, and I'll move on to topic 6. Up to this point, it might seem like ignoring is always the smartest strategy. But here comes a nuance that separates impulsive reaction from intelligentsia strategica. Ignoring is not an absolute rule. In fact, it's a conscious choice. There are moments when silence communicates strength, and there are moments when it can communicate omission. Knowing how to distinguish these two scenarios is one of the most sophisticated forms of poder psychologico in human interactions. Poucos entendem isso, but truly strategic people don't live reacting to everything, and they also don't live ignoring everything. They observe the context. They ask silently, is this an irrelevant provocation or a situation that demands a stance? This careful reading echoes classic analyses associated with the autoridad, Machiavel, where strategy was never about a single rule, but about adaptation to the scenario. For example, imagine a situation of real injustice at work. A colleague takes credit for something you did, or someone tries to distort important information in a meeting. In that case, silence may not be strategic. It may simply allow a wrong narrative to solidify. Here, a response must exist, but not as an emotional reaction. The response should come with calm clarity and superioridad silenciosa. Something simple like, I think it's important to clarify one point. This project began with the proposal I presented in last week's meeting. No aggressiveness, no drama, just precision. That kind of posture shows emotional control and also firmness. It's a rare balance, and exactly because of that it creates an aura of exclusividade, because few people can respond without reacting. There's another revelação occulta inside this logic. Ignoring provocations protects your energy, but speaking at the right moments protects your position. Whoever develops this skill begins to navigate social interactions with far more clarity. Small criticisms stop feeling like threats, provocations lose power, and important discussions start being handled with more mental presence. Little by little, something emerges that many people begin to notice intuitively. You don't react on impulse. You choose when to act. And that conscious choice creates a much more solid psychological presence. Curiously, when someone begins to operate like this, something changes not only in external interactions, but also in the way that person sees their own silence. Did you like this topic, or do you want to adjust something? More examples deepen an idea, change the tone. If everything's good, say okay so I can move on to the next step. The introduction based on the title. Now stop for a moment and think honestly. How many times have you reacted immediately to something, and later realized that reaction only fed the situation? Maybe a provocation, maybe an unnecessary comment, maybe someone trying to diminish you. Most people believe they need to respond to everything, defend every idea, clap back at every criticism, constantly prove value. But here's the big perspective shift that completely transforms human interactions. Power isn't only in what you say, it's in what you choose not to respond to. When you develop intelligentsia strategica, you begin to realize something that poucos entendem isso. Many provocations exist only to capture your attention, and when you give that attention without thinking, you give away control. Silence, when used with awareness, is not weakness. It's poder psychologico. It's the ability to observe without reacting, to choose your battles, to keep presence even when others try to destabilize you. That creates something rare in human interactions, superioridad silenciosa. Not that loud arrogance that tries to prove value all the time, but a calm presence that communicates security without needing to explain. And there's a revelação occulta in all of this. The more you control your reactions, the less people can control you. Now I want to ask you some important questions. How many arguments in your life truly deserved your energy? How many provocations could simply have been ignored? And how would your social life change if you started choosing, consciously, where to place your attention? Maybe the real transformation isn't in learning to speak better, but in learning when to remain silent. If this video made you see human interactions differently, then it was already worth it. Now tell me here in the comments, have you ever noticed a situation where silence had more impact than any response? I truly want to read your experience, and if you want to keep developing this mindset of emotional control, social strategy, and psychological reading of people, then take advantage right now. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because in the next videos, we're going to explore other deep dynamics of human behavior, the ones most people live through, but almost no one understands. Sometimes, everything starts with something simple, a moment when you choose not to react, and in that silence, the psychological game changes completely.